Good morning, everyone. I'm here in studio with Russ Gugino. As you know, Russ was a lead person for Congressman Jack Kemp in the day. But we have a very exciting show for you today. So my guest today is an absolute warrior for truth, accountability, and the American people. He is a man who refuses to back down from the deep state, the corrupt media, or the medical establishment. As the senior senator from Wisconsin and chairman of the Permanent Committee on Investigations, he has led the charge to expose the biggest government scandal of our lifetime. He is a man who finally held Anthony Fauci's feet to the fire, forcing a historic criminal contempt vote and exposing thousands of secret text messages the bureaucrats tried to hide from you. Now he's leading the fight for grieving families with a massive Capitol Hill expose on COVID hospital protocols this September. He is our true champion. This is Senator Ron Johnson. Senator, I very much appreciate you being here today.
Good morning, Ralph. Well, you're making me blush here.
It's all true, Senator. It's all true. And our people know it's true. I want to get into a little bit of your background because for 30 years, you were an American entrepreneur, businessman. I want to tell people the character that you are. In your youth, I did this research. In your youth, you had several jobs. You were a newspaper delivery boy, a caddy, hay baler on a farm, dishwasher, night manager of a restaurant. Then you went on to college, got your bachelor's degree, you studied an MBA, but then you established a business, a plastic business. Tell us a little bit about that history of you.
Well, it is true that, probably the most formative thing about me is I was raised by two parents who loved me that had deep faith in God. And I think if every American child can say that, we'd have a country with a brighter future, let's put it that way. But no, I did work hard, but not because I want to, it's because my mom made me. So, we mowed lawns. I lied about my age, got a job at Walgreens Grill at the age of 15, dishwasher, soda jerk, fry cook, became night manager before I became 16. And I just worked hard all my life. I left high school 1 year early so I could start college early, so I could work full-time while I did it. So I worked full-time all the way through college, left college with $7,000 in the bank. I had an opportunity very early on to join my brother-in-law to start up a plastics company, and did that, sold it to a British company. I was the general manager for about 10 years under that British company. I purchased it back, and then ran for U.S. Senate when I was 55 after I had 30 years of experience in the private sector, solving a lot of problems. That's what happens in manufacturing. So my education is in accounting. I'm an accountant.
So your first enter into politics, you ran for the U.S. Senate. That's pretty amazing. And you, in 2010, and you defeated a seated senator. Isn't that the case?
Yeah, I would say that he lost. I mean, this was all part of the Tea. Again, it was. I mean, it was the Tea Party movement. It was the perfect time for a business person, manufacturer, to step up the plate and say, "This is, obviously, what's happening in our country is not good." Back then, we were $14 trillion in debt, and I ran on a platform of we're mortgaging our children's future. It's wrong. It's immoral. It's got to stop. And it's all about freedom. And that was literally my platform. It resonated in 2010, and so that back then that worked. I mean, that was all the Tea Party movement. Now, unfortunately, now we're seeing 16 years later the rise of socialism. So I'm concerned about our country. I think it's in peril, and I think COVID opened up a lot of people's eyes to just how corrupt government is, how you can't trust the experts. But unfortunately, you got about half of America that love big government, continue to have the wool pulled over their eyes, and believe in them and are defending people like Fauci. It's really pretty amazing.
So I understand. You see, this is when I read your history. a very successful business guy. Didn't have a silver spoon in his mouth growing up, did all kinds of jobs and got his education, worked hard, built a major company. And then because of Obamacare, because the country was headed in the wrong direction, you decide to take this major change and run against somebody who's entrenched in Wisconsin, and you're successful. So your motivation is what, I read into all of this. What motivates you is us, is your constituents, the American people. It motivates you that it needs to be done right, and it hasn't been. So I want to pivot now to December of 2020, December 8th of 2020, when you held Senate hearings and you brought in Pierre Kory. So tell us a little bit about what was going on at that time and what was your motivation.
Well, that was the last year I was chairman of the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs. And you would think that would not be the hearing you'd be holding oversight on the pandemic, but the Health Committee wasn't doing it. I held my first hearing in February of 2020 with Scott Gottlieb and Judy Gerberding, and that's where we found out that we don't produce the precursor chemicals or the active pharmaceutical ingredients for drugs. We were highly vulnerable. In May, then, I brought in Johnny Anitas and other folks to talk about the Princess Cruise. Don't freak out about COVID. It's not Ebola. It's not SARS-1. It's not MERS. As Anthony Fauci privately admitted to his diary, it's maybe going to be twice a bad flu season. Not to downplay a flu season, but this is not something to freak out about. It's not something to destroy people's lives and the economy by shutting things down. So I held that hearing in May, and that's really the first time I knew about Pierre Kory. He came and testified on a Zoom hearing because you had to shut everything down, and he talked about corticosteroids as a treatment for COVID. Of course, he was pilloried and ridiculed and vilified in the media until it was probably a couple of months later, where you actually had a study in England on dexamethasone, and that became used in hospitals, but at too low a dose, quite honestly. But again, nothing that we did to COVID made sense to me. I was an early advocate for looking at any kind of generic drug, hydroxychloroquine. In March, when a state senator from Michigan claimed that he was cured by hydroxychloroquine. So let's look at this. Why not give it a shot? So I finally held my first hearing on hydroxychloroquine with Peter McCulloch and Harvey Rich, those folks. That was in November. And then I followed it up with the hearing you're talking about with Pierre Kory. What's notable about that is most of these doctors that I brought in, unfortunately, gave them a platform, destroyed their careers because they were vilified for speaking out, for telling people the truth. But most of them were Democrats. They didn't vote for Trump.
Right.
So they voted for Obama. They voted for Biden. So Pierre Kory comes into our hearing room, and my ranking member then was Michigan Senator Gary Peters, and he just starts ripping into Pierre Kory, which, Pierre Kory's, I think, at the heart, he's a New Yorker, right?
Yes.
And that did not sit well at all. And so Pierre, in just a splendid 10-minute rebuttal to what Gary Peters had talked about, it went viral. And something like 8 million views on YouTube before YouTube took it down.
Well, that's what I was going to get to. So I saw that interview in January of 21. I told you the story. An 80-year-old woman, client of mine's mother-in-law, goes to a local hospital. She's placed on a ventilator. Said she's going to have 20% chance of living. She's in ICU. Her son sees you interview Pierre Kory. He showed me that video, and with that motivation, her son convinced the ICU doctor to give her one dose of ivermectin, one little pill. She gets off the ventilator, out of ICU. She goes onto the COVID floor. She starts to decline. They refuse to give her any more ivermectin. I sue the hospital. I win. She gets ivermectin. 6 days later, she leaves the hospital. She's alive today. All because of your Senate hearings. All because that Pierre Kory testified. Her son saw that, showed me that video, which is now down, right? YouTube took that down.
Correct. And what's interesting about this is, again, I had Pierre testify in May of 2020. We called him back, when he came to me and said, "Hey, Ron, we've got this ivermectin. I've got the manuscript. Just get me in front of NIH. Get me in front of these people. This pandemic's over. We've got the solution for it." And I'm the guy saying, Dr. Corey, you're up against powerful forces here. I mean, temper your enthusiasm here in terms of what you're going to be able to accomplish. But I'm happy to, bring you in on a hearing, and you can make the case, and I'll do everything I can to get your manuscript in front of NIH. Of course, he did, and I hate to say that I was right and he was wrong from the standpoint of they were going to be accepting of this. They didn't want to look at the science. They wanted the experimental gene therapy. Anthony Fauci always wanted a universal vaccination program for the globe, and he needed a pandemic, and he got it, and so he pushed it. And so they had to destroy, they had to sabotage any early treatment, whether it's hydroxychloroquine and zinc, whether it's budesonide, whether it's ivermectin, anything they had to destroy. And they went out of their way, particularly with ivermectin. I mean, the fact that you had the FDA do that famous tweet about, "Come on, y'all, you're not a horse."
Yeah, you're not a horse, you're not a cow.
To a Nobel Prize-winning drug that had an incredibly safe profile. It's part of my COVID chart where I show the number of adverse events and deaths associated with ivermectin versus the COVID injection. I mean, it's not even close, and yet that's the drug that they were scaring the American people and medical professionals, doctors. You can't do this. One question I had for you: did you ever, in your lawsuits, invoke the right to try law?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Was it ever? Did the courts ever take that seriously?
Here's what would happen, Senator. So I would make my pitch that I would show them from the World Health Organization the adverse effects of ivermectin versus the adverse effects of remdesivir. And so remdesivir had already killed 560 people. And I would ask, about ivermectin. And they would say, "Oh, no, ivermectin's not approved by the World Health Organization for COVID. It's not approved by the FDA. It's not approved by this. It's not approved by that." And then I'd say, "But Judge, we are in a right to life state, or right to try state. So this fits the theory of the right to try." And then the argument would be, the hospital would say, "Oh, no, it doesn't work in the right to try because this is an approved drug. And a right to try is for experimental drugs." I say, "Judge, they can't have it both ways. They can't tell me that ivermectin's not approved, and yet it can't be used for the right to try because it is approved." I had one situation where a judge ordered the ivermectin. The hospital refused. In this one situation out of 200, I went back to ask for contempt. The judge in that case ordered that if they did not give the ivermectin by 9 o'clock that evening, and this is 4 o'clock in the afternoon, if they did not, it was $10,000 a day fine from the day he ordered it, which was 4 or 5 days earlier. And they finally gave it to that person, and that person lived.
Yeah, no, it's sick what happened during COVID, and your example of the number of cases that you won and the people lived, and of the cases you lost or didn't get before a judge, they all died. I mean, I know it's not a random controlled trial, but man, just like VAERS, the worldwide over 39,000 deaths, 24% of those deaths have occurred within 2 days. So yeah, I know VAERS doesn't prove causation, but how can you ignore that correlation? How can you ignore the Rasmussen poll that says 24% of Americans believe they know somebody who died from the COVID shot? I mean, how can you? But they do. They deny it. It's just unbelievable to me. How powerful the forces are that we are up against. How blind people are. How they're willing to keep their eyes and ears closed to the truth.
Well, we're going to take a short break, and we're going to come back, and we're going to continue this discussion with you, Senator. You are a hero in this case. We'll be right back.
Under the advice of my attorneys, I will invoke my right under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution to refrain from answering your questions.
The Conservative Roundtable with Ralph Lorigo, Chairman. The Conservative Roundtable.
This should shock every American. Anthony Fauci is culpable. He was culpable in terms of the origin of COVID because he funded the gain of function research, which is why he had to make sure that those people who thought it was man-made would immediately change their opinion and say, no, this is, that's a conspiracy theory. This sprang from nature.
Welcome back, everyone. We're here with Senator Ron Johnson, an amazing man who has done so much for this country. So, Senator, I still want to stay on this, ivermectin situation. So, ivermectin, when I was fighting this fight, they tried, a lot of places, a lot of states tried to punish doctors who ordered ivermectin. And in Nebraska, the state attorney general was asked to punish a doctor who prescribed ivermectin. And that state attorney general wrote a very lengthy report dated October 14, 2021. And he talks about the history of ivermectin, that it had been used by 3.7 billion doses, 3.7 billion doses without any major side effects. He said the WHO recognized ivermectin as one of its essential medications and recognized the importance of the drug. In 2015, the discoverers of ivermectin won a Nobel Prize for medicine. And in a decade leading up to COVID-19 pandemic, studies began to show ivermectin's surprising versatility. This is what he says. By 2017, ivermectin had demonstrated antiviral activities against several RNA viruses by blocking the nuclear trafficking of viral proteins. I mean, it had a history, Senator, that, Pierre Corey pointed to, a number of doctors pointed to, Paul Merrick, Robert Malone. I got to know all these doctors, and yet Fauci and Big Pharma refused.
Well, because if they had effective treatments, they would not be able to get the emergency use authorization on their experimental gene therapy.
And that's exactly the reason. Because if there was a reasonable alternative, the vaccine couldn't be approved on the emergency basis, right?
Correct. And, it's an antiparasitic drug. There's the other antiparasitic drugs that now are being explored for treatment of cancer.
Right.
This is how absurd it is. I've got a couple spots on my face as dermatologists wanted me to do a chemo wash, which kind of destroys your face for a few weeks. And my sister was using a cream with ivermectin in it. So I said, how about some of that? He said, yeah, fine. So he prescribed me ivermectin cream. It took the insurance company a month to approve it because it's ivermectin. I went to get the prescription refilled. It took another month for the insurance company to approve 1% ivermectin cream. So, no, the FDA did a really good job of destroying the reputation in the medical field for ivermectin. Pierre Corey's written the book War on Ivermectin. He's written another book, War on Chlorine Dioxide, which apparently BARDA, one of our government agencies, at one point in time called it the universal antidote. So, DMSO, let's read a Midwestern doctor. I think there's so many of these cheap generic molecules that have been available that the Big Pharma does not want, because all they want to do is push a new patentable drug.
Exactly.
Like remdesivir, like the mRNA platform. These things are highly profitable. And, of course, all vaccines, because they have a blanket liability protection, unbelievably profitable for the manufacturers, because once they get approved, they couldn't care less, truthfully, about safety because they don't get sued for it, unlike a drug that can't. Manufacturers can be sued, which is why the trials for drugs drag on for years, and they have massive random-controlled, placebo-controlled studies. But vaccines, man, they rush those to market as soon as possible, and then obviously the manufacturers don't want to really look at the safety profile, nor do the regulators. The guys like Peter Marks, in charge of CBER, which approves vaccines, but then also surveils for safety. If you've approved a drug or a vaccine, do you want to admit you're wrong? So how, you're going to doctor any kind, and that's what we've seen in my investigations now. The people responsible for overseeing the safety, Fauci, Peter Marks, Tom Shimbakuro, and CDC, these guys were, Fauci knew it. Cytokine storm fever could theoretically cause miscarriages. Peter Marks was shown that his algorithm was going to mask and hide safety signals. 26 days later, they were shown dozens of safety signals, including sudden cardiac death, pulmonary infarction, which Fauci suffered from himself in June of 2021, different types of strokes. Okay? Tom Shimbakuro in CDC, he deleted his emails on his devices. And then even worse, because we want to try to recover them, they're deleted from the servers as well. Okay, so it's hard to literally delete. It's conspiratorial, I'd say.
Yeah, well,
so again, we are seeing so much corruption of the safety surveillance system. It was grossly inadequate. It was monitored negligently, if not fraudulently. And I'm way on the side of this entire thing has been a massive fraud. They were well aware of. I mean, Thayers was screaming at people. I mean, screaming at them. I mean, I was watching it because I fortunately had been talking to Michael Yeadon, could not believe what his former colleagues at Pfizer were going to do, creating a genetic therapy that's going to have the body create turn your cells into manufacturing sites for the spike protein, which is toxic to the body. So your body's going to attack it. That's called inflammation. That's called myocarditis.
Right.
Cytokine storm, if that occurs in the placenta, that would cause a miscarriage. Again, you don't have to be a doctor or medical researcher to just understand the basic mechanism of harm here. So these supposedly experts, they had to know as well. But again, they were so hell-bent on a universal vaccination program with this gene therapy, nothing was going to get in their way. Nothing was going to stop them. And that's their attitudes to this day.
Senator, one of the reasons why I'm so impressed with what you've been able to do is because of your history. You are exactly what our forefathers was looking for. Someone who made their way in their own business, their own careers, and then went into government service. And that's what we need. You're not taken by what's happened, by the longevity of having to get reelected. And, what I see, what I look at, and I talked to a very good friend of mine, Congressman Tom Reynolds, during all of this and say, Tom, how could this possibly happen? And Tom said, because Big Pharma gives to both sides. They're not Democrat. They're not Republican. They give tons of money to both sides. And so they have that major influence. Someone like you who came from the private sector, someone like you whose motivation was to make us all safer and better off. That is what we need in government, and you continue to do it. And, we're going to talk about exposing Fauci. I mean, there is a man who, for his own glory, was willing to sacrifice people. What happened to do no harm?
Well, first of all, if you want to know about Anthony Fauci, start off by reading Bobby Kennedy's book, The Real Anthony Fauci, and you'll come to understand very quickly what a monster this guy is.
Right.
Then you just fast forward in terms of his involvement in gain-of-function reasresearch, sabotaging early treatment, pushing this genetic therapy. So no, in my mind, Anthony Fauci is a monster.
Yes.
He's got to be one of the most infamous villains in history. So in terms of U.S. history. Now you got Hitler. There are people worse, but he ranks right up there in my book. I mean, what the harm he's done, the lives his actions have cost, it's literally untold. I can't really tell you, but in terms of what makes me somewhat unique, probably in Congress, is I'd rather go home.
Yeah,
and I can't tell you how big a difference that. I mean, when you don't, I'd like to just walk away from this.
No, we need you there. But your motivation is what brought you there. That motivation, I know, is still in effect. I know you're going to have a hearing in September. I know you're not giving up on this. Fauci, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people died because of the lack of information, because of the refusal to put out the truth, because of Big Pharma being able to push their agenda and make hundreds of billions of dollars.
Well, I'm actually going to go up to starting to get some good news coverage. A member of Parliament up in Canada named Dean Allison is going to hold a 4-day. I can't remember what the exact call, but it's a national inquiry on COVID, a reckoning. And I'm going to actually, I believe, going to be the first witness on September 8th to kind of kick this whole thing off. And I'm really looking forward to it because I'm hoping I have many hours on the witness table because there's a lot to download on this. There's just so much that the legacy media will not cover. I mean, for example, my report from April 29th, 2026, where I revealed that Peter Marks was shown that his algorithm was going to hide safety signals. Then they were shown the actual safety signals. Not one major network, not one major newspaper has covered that as a news story. I think it's the largest government scandal in my lifetime that the people charged who's responsible for surveilling for safety signals, again, not looking for definitive proof before they warn the public, but literally looking for those unusual safety signals so they could warn the doctors to be on the lookout for it. Warn the patients. Warn pregnant women. Be a little careful with this thing. Weigh your benefit versus your risk because we do know a higher cytokine storm, the second dose, that if impacting your placenta, that could cause a miscarriage. They should have been warned so you had fully informed consent, but they weren't warned. Time and time and time again, my investigations show the regulators knew these things. They simply would not tell the American public because they didn't want to create vaccine hesitancy. We see it time and time again in their communications. Oh, the boss really wants to push these boosters, meaning Biden.
Yeah.
The boss wants to make sure these things get approved because he wants to mandate them to the military and to other Americans. So, boy, we can't create vaccine hesitancy. We can't provide the information to the American public, or we won't be able to get the experimental gene therapy approved. We won't be able to mandate it. We won't be able to get these boosters recommended every freaking 6 months.
So to me, this is all about money. I mean, ivermectin's generic at this point in time. You could buy ivermectin for 80 cents a pill. Remdesivir was $3,000 a shot. The government gave hospitals a 20% bonus to use remdesivir. It was all money driven. It is so corrupt that that's what happens in our country. You think this is the most progressive country in the world, that we have the best science, the best medical professionals. You would expect that to be the case. Yet here it failed us. And it failed us because Big Pharma was able to push its agenda. Fauci was willing to bow to all of it, was complicit in all of it, and allowed it to happen.
Well, science has been thoroughly corrupted. Not all of it. I mean, you still have people, like Elon Musk, just pushing the boundaries. But kind of basic science around medicine, this evidence-based medicine, I think it's been a disaster. I mean, when you pay for research, you get the result you want. And so we just get that confirmation, and peer review is a joke. You get peer reviewers that are going to give a negative peer review to a study that is going to recommend something other than what they're flacking for or what they're being compensated for. So science has been thoroughly corrupted. I've been saying that the number one task of Bobby Kennedy and Jay Bhattacharya is to, as much as possible, return integrity to science.
Yes.
That's going to be a tall order because, again, you're up against powerful forces. Again, I come from the private sector. I don't have a problem with big companies unless they use their power to capture and corrupt government, which is basically what's happened across the board, not just in medicine, but across the board. You've got companies that have had the burden of government regulation. They first figure out how to survive with over-regulation, and then once they figure out how to survive, they figure out how to turn it to their advantage. So now they capture the agencies, they turn the regulation to their advantage. Over-regulation, big businesses can pay to be regulated. Little businesses can't. And so it literally is about power. With Anthony Fauci, I think he wanted to be the next Jonas Salk.
Yeah.
I assure you, he had to be freaking out that maybe I caused this pandemic. So that's why he covered up his involvement in gain-of-function research.
That is what I want to talk about in the next segment. But just before we get there, you couldn't even get ivermectin. There was a period of time during 2021, my son-in-law got COVID, and I talked to Pierre. He told me what needed to be done. I called a pharmacist that I was very friendly with. The pharmacist, I knew him very well. He could not get me ivermectin. He said, if you try to give me a prescription that says ivermectin for COVID, I can't give it to you. And that's when I made a connection to be able to get this medication from India, and so I was able to have it. But our Attorney General in the state of New York, Letitia James, who's the worst Attorney General, by the way, in the country, she wrote a letter to all the doctors on the Frontline COVID Alliance threatening to penalize them for if they were to prescribe ivermectin here in New York State. All right, we're going to take a break now. We're going to come back, and we're going to get into the depth of Anthony Fauci.
Seeing no other motions, the question is on reporting of an original resolution regarding contempt of Congress. The clerk will call the roll.
Senator Johnson.
Yes.
Senator Langford.
Aye.
Senator Scott.
Yes.
Senator Hawley.
Aye.
Senator Moreno.
On behalf of the millions of people harmed by Anthony Fauci, resoundingly yes.
Senator Ernst. Aye. Senator Moody. Senator Peters.
No.
Senator Hassan.
No.
Senator Blumenthal. No. Senator Fetterman. Senator Kim. Senator Gallego.
No by proxy.
Senator Slotkin.
No by proxy.
Senator Paul.
Yes.
The Conservative Roundtable with Ralph Lorigo, Chairman. The Conservative Roundtable.
Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Fauci, I hope the American people listen very carefully to Chairman Paul's opening statement. I think it's a stunning indictment of the actions you've taken that have been so destructive to global health. I certainly understand why you needed a pardon. I certainly understand why, on the advice of counsel, you're not answering any questions, because I think it would be almost impossible for you to answer the questions truthfully.
So here we are back with Senator Ron Johnson. Senator, I now want to talk about Fauci. So your subcommittee committee executed an incredible move, forcing Health and Human Services to hand over Anthony Fauci's government iPhone, exposing over 34,000 text messages. Tell us a little bit about how you went about being able to accomplish that, and then what you found.
So first you have to understand that I subpoenaed all these records, I think January, February of 2025. It was a friendly subpoena to Bobby Kennedy. You know, he was committed to radical transparency. He wanted to get us all the information around all these issues. And unfortunately, he's not getting help from the career bureaucrats in HHS. I think they've been doing everything they can to sabotage his efforts at radical transparency. I think it's absurd that we only got Anthony Fauci's phone last week. That should have been turned over to us February, March, April of 2025. So, again, understand what President Trump, what Bobby Kennedy are up against. You got the deep state. It is populated, first of all, by a lot of good career bureaucrats who are just trying to do their job. I have no doubt about that. But you've got people in key positions who I would consider are certainly on the left of the ideological spectrum. They look at President Trump, they look at Bobby Kennedy as something that this too shall pass, and they'll do everything they can to frustrate and sabotage the implementation of their agenda, including exposing. And, of course, a lot of these people in key positions who would be responsible for turning over emails, turning over things that are responsive to our inquiry, they were complicit in these actions. They were complicit in hiding the safety signal. So we've begun our interviews with people like Tom Shimabukuro completely unrepentant. You can't. I cannot tell you how frustrating it is, which is why you need documents. So now we finally got the phone. We've been able to download them into searchable form, 34,000 texts, 522 voicemails, 900 contacts. And what's interesting about that is he only had 3 names in his contact list. Otherwise, the other 900 are phone numbers. And anybody who texts realizes as soon as somebody texts you, you create a new contact. So there's a name attached to that phone number. Because, again, our brains just don't, unless you're, some kind of savant, you can't keep track of phone numbers, which indicates that somebody deleted his contacts.
Right.
So again, we got 11 million pages in the data dump. not somewhat, obviously responsive to our requests, but our oversight requests are pretty targeted. We kind of want the agencies to sort this stuff out for us. No, they just dumped 11 million pages, which, good thing I don't have a big staff. I have 6 full-time investigators. Okay, Senate's not real serious about oversight, trust me, or investigations. They like to spend money. But, my 6 investigators pulled the needle out of the haystack in terms of Peter Marks. By the way, we also were the ones that found the David Morin's email out of a 115,000-page production to a university, not from HHS, this is from a university. This is this famous email where David Morin's goes, I've got this FOIA lady, shows me how to make emails disappear. And, don't send me things to my government account, send it to my Gmail account. Now, he's being prosecuted for destruction of federal records. I'm hoping that Tom Shimbakuro or somebody has to pay. Shimbakuro actually deleted emails on the advice of HHS counsel. And then not only are those emails deleted from his device, but also the server, which is hard. You got to have somebody working with you to do that. You should never be destroying public records off the server.
Right.
Okay? So, again, I don't know where that investigation is going to go. I'm hoping. HHS, OIG, none of these inspector generals are particularly transparent to congressional oversight, unfortunately. But somebody has to be held accountable for just the destruction of federal records, which will frustrate our ability to get to the truth. The wonderful thing about the Fauci emails is we believe those are pretty much unedited. That's a real window into Anthony Fauci's dark, dark soul. I think his text messages, and again, we're just skimming the surface right now. We're trying to focus on key dates, and I thought it was pretty revealing the fact that he was certainly concerned about the cytokine storm possibly causing miscarriages, but he told no one. And understand, that is their responsibility.
Right.
Again, they're supposed to be looking for the hard to find signals, not the obvious ones. The hard to find ones. That's why all these algorithms, searching these databases to say, this might be a problem. Let's alert doctors. Let's alert practitioners. Let's warn the public to be on the lookout for this kind of reaction to this drug or that particular vaccine. No, the internal documents said they needed definitive proof. And even when they had definitive proof, they weren't going to warn the public because they didn't want to create vaccine hesitancy. That's the overall motivating factor that we're seeing throughout this thing.
So my understanding with the miscarriages is that there was a substantial percentage of miscarriages if the vaccine was given in the first trimester, and so what they did to manipulate that was combine first trimester with third trimester vaccines, so that the percentages went down. A pure manipulation.
Well, first of all, that study, and again, I think that was a corrupt study issued by Tom Shimbakuro in June of 2021. And there's been other interpretations of that. I'm not claiming anything because it's as even the Wall Street Journal said, it's such a sloppy study. Finally, the New England Journal of Medicine, so that study is published said the miscarriage rate was 12.6%. New England Journal of Medicine finally had to revise that and say that we really don't know what the denominator is. We really can't come up with a conclusion.
Right.
Other people looked at that. I think Naomi Wolf is one of them. That then Dr. James Thorpe, who's a 40-year practicing OBGYN, he was seeing the problems. He was seeing the harms, the miscarriages, the change in menstrual cycles, that kind of stuff. So his looking at the data showed that of the 827 pregnancies they were tracking in that study, 700 of them received their injection in the third trimester.
Third trimester, right.
So you can't include that in the denominator. So then they remove the 700, ends up with 104 divided by 127, comes up with 82%.
Right.
I don't know. It seems like other people have looked at that, and there's other problems with that study, and so it's lower. But the bottom line is nobody knows. And again, I just think,
well, to me, Senator,
it's corrupted their safety surveillance system.
To me, it's a deliberate manipulation because it was always push the vaccine. That was a deliberate, manipulation. But you were able to use Fauci's own words to show a fundamental disconnect, to show the red flags. That's what you were able to do. And here's a man who took the Fifth Amendment 111 times.
Yeah, it's so galling. Is he says, there were no red flags. Significant cytokine storms after the second dose and fever, that's a red flag. Okay, again, you talk to practitioners, go, yeah, you have a cytokine storm, inflammation of the placenta, that can cause a miscarriage. So you go out later, privately you're acknowledging that, but then you go out and say, oh, we're not seeing any red flags. We're not seeing safety signals. Yes, you were.
Yes, they were.
Proof. You were shown them,
And
the legacy media is not covering this as a story.
Senator, let me ask you this question. Russ Gugino, I used to work with Jack Kemp, and I'm a great admirer of yours, as are so many people in Western New York. I understand that the current flu vaccine is also mRNA. Is that correct? And if that is correct, shouldn't that be more publicized to the public so they can make informed choices?
So, yes, you're exactly right on that. And let me just talk about how absurd this is and how they play with statistics and why when they use relative risk ratio versus absolute risk ratio. So just quick some numbers. Nobody knows exactly what the case or the infection fatality rate is of flu, but oftentimes here it's like 0.1%. Okay, what we know from Moderna and from the manufacturer's own studies is the normal flu vaccine has a 2.6% rate of serious adverse events. So let me define serious adverse event as death, a condition that will result in immediate death, permanent disability, birth defects. So that's what is a serious adverse event. That's what it's considered, right? 2.6% rate. So now they get this Moderna mRNA flu vaccine. It has a 2.7% serious adverse event. Now, I don't believe a 2.6% serious adverse event rate compared to, again, depends on how old you are, how vulnerable you are to the flu, a 0.1% fatality rate from the flu. I've had so many flus in my life. I've never died. Okay, so do I want to subject myself? Again, I should be making this decision. Do I want to take the 0.1% risk of death from a serious flu versus pretty well known 2.6, 2.7% rate of serious adverse event? I've decided I'm not taking that risk. I'm not taking flu shots. I certainly would never take an mRNA flu shot. But again, we don't. So the way they present this is, this is comparable to the current flu vaccine. That's 2.7. So it's like comparing arsenic to hemlock.
Yeah,
they're equally dangerous, but equally safe. So again, you've got to look at the facts, and they never show the facts. They figure out exactly how to muddy it all. The relative risk ratio. So this is reduced relative risk by 95%. Well, if your real risk was 0.1%, reducing it by 95% takes down to 0.001%, but still it's negligible. Do you based on that, do you want for example, 7.7% risk of having to seek medical care from the COVID injection, which is what VSafe told us, or 25% risk of losing time at work because the injection made you so ill you couldn't go to work, couldn't go to school, disrupted your day? Again, that's what we really ought to be talking about. What was for children? Why would you ever have pushed the mRNA injection on children who we knew had a virtually 0% chance of any kind of serious harm from the COVID infection? But again, we know from VSafe. Government-owned data, which, by the way, Aaron Siri had to sue the FDA, CDC twice to get them to release the results of their VSafe database, which was 10 million people set up specifically to track this. By the way, in really minimal. It was an awful system just to begin with in terms of it was not meant to ferret out serious harm. It was mainly just talk about, injection site inflammation, that kind of stuff. It really was an awful safety surveillance system.
You put up a chart during those hearings of the drug adverse event comparison. And just tell us a little bit about the COVID vaccine compared to, for example, ivermectin or the flu, the adverse event comparison.
So I'm actually trying to pull it up real quick here. Well, first of all, it's dramatic difference. Orders of magnitude worse. So for ivermectin, I can't remember, but it's a few dozen deaths per year report. Again, it doesn't prove causation, but report, a couple dozen. But we're up on COVID worldwide over 39,000 deaths associated with COVID injection. 39,000. 24% of those deaths have occurred either on the day of vaccination or within 2 days. Again, doesn't prove causation, but that's correlation. And we know from the Pilgrim study that about 1% of adverse events are actually reported to VAERS. So, compare that to the the swine flu vaccine. After about 40 million doses and a couple dozen deaths, 25 to 30 deaths, 400 cases of Guillain-Barré disease, a neurological disorder, they pulled that thing off the market. Less than 3 dozen deaths.
Yeah.
We're up to 39,000. We had thousands of deaths already reported within the first couple of months. And at that time, because we were injecting the vulnerable, 35 to 50% of people were dying within 2 days of vaccination.
So
that's
what?
In, January, February, March, April that year. That's when I started looking at VAERS, tracking it closely. I actually confronted Francis Collins and said, Dr. Collins, are you watching what's happening at VAERS? At this point in time, I think there were 2,906 deaths, or 2,926 deaths reported in VAERS. I think it's like 46% were occurring in 2 days of vaccination. I asked him, "Are you watching VAERS?" And Francis Collins goes, "Well, Senator, yeah, we've attributed 6 deaths to the J&J vaccine in childbearing age women, from clotting. So what about the other 2,920?" He just callously looked at me and said, "Well, Senator, people die." They weren't looking at their safety surveillance. They didn't want to. They had to be freaking out, having pushed us to get the emergency use authorization. The worst case scenario of the contractor that was inputting these things was 1,000 a day. They were getting thousands of these things a day. Okay, they had to be freaking out. But then March 1st, they realized, guys,
right,
our algorithm that's analyzing this are going to hide and mask these safety signals, so we can go lie to the American public and say, we're not seeing safety signals. Like Fauci lies, we're not seeing any red flags. No, cytokine storm and fever is a red flag. And you saw it, and you admit it to yourself or to your colleagues. They all knew it, and they all covered up.
Senator, unfortunately, we have to end today at this point. I do want to have you back after that September 28th hearing, after all those people come and expose what happened to them. I would appreciate if you would come back onto the show, tell Western New York what you're about, tell Western New York what has happened, and tell Western New York what they, where they need to go to get really good advice, or, how they need to protect themselves. I thank you very much, Senator, for being on today.